Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for this online avid reader event, all about Anne Richards' new work, A Book of Doors. My name's Jennifer Stevens. I'm the book club's manager at Avid Reader, and it's my very real pleasure to be hosting this event tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. Here it is the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight for this discussion of A Book of Doors, written by Anne Richards and published by And Also Books. Before I hand you over to our speakers this evening, Anne Richards and Edwina Shaw, I'd like to reiterate some of the information mentioned in the email you received today. You've all automatically been placed on mute and will remain so throughout the event, but I will invite everybody to unmute at the very end of the evening so that you can join me in thanking our speakers for tonight's discussion. Also, if you set your settings to speaker view, our guest speakers will take up the screen space. Anne is keen to answer your questions in the latter part of the event, so please start sending your questions through as you think of them using the chat box. If you haven't seen it, then you'll find the button that will open the chat box towards the bottom left of your screen. Your questions will come to me and I'll relay as many as we have time for in the Q&A period. I'd also like to mention that we have a lovely big stack of copies of A Book of Doors at Avid Reader, and I'll be posting the link to purchase your copy of A Book of Doors shortly. Now, I would like to introduce you to Anne Richards. As a young student, Anne Richards was kicked out of home for marching in the first Vietnam moratorium in May 1970. Her novella, Demonstrating Defiance, was published in the Griffith Review, number 62, All Being Equal, in 2018. And now A Book of Doors has been published this year, 2020. It's based on the student, radical and countercultural movements at UQ and inner city Brisbane in the late 1960s and early 70s, and was published by And Also Books. Anne's compelling portrayal of a young woman's life in Brisbane during the turbulent late 60s and early 70s engages with a period of radical cultural and political change. It was a time when personal beliefs and lifestyles collided with conservative attitudes in her family, her city, and her country. Anne teaches literature, publishing, and communication at Griffith University. And in conversation with Anne tonight is Edwina Shaw. Edwina Shaw is a Brisbane writer and editor of fiction, memoir, and screenplays. She's the author of A Guide Through Grief, Thrill Seekers, and over 40 published short pieces. Edwina is the editor of Bielke Blues and a co-editor of Our Inside Voices. Edwina also runs Relax and Write retreats. And it's now my great pleasure to hand over to Anne Richards and Edwina Shaw.
Hi everybody, I'm Edwina and I'm very happy to be here tonight. Hi everybody, nice to see some familiar faces. Hello everybody else, welcome. Glad Helen's wearing something now. And, I'm very happy to be here talking about Anne's wonderful new book, A Book of Doors, which I helped her to edit. So we'll start off with a brief reading from the beginning of the book, just to give you a picture of this personal and political story.
Great. Well, it starts at the very beginning, which is a confrontation with my father one evening about the Vietnam moratorium. It didn't have to happen like that. I don't know why Dad chose that moment to morph into a father tyrant. I knew that his body held an anger that could be explosive, threatening to demolish anyone in his path. It didn't happen often, but it nearly took me down that night. I also knew that my father hated war. Although he never spoke about it personally, His dark comments and edgy silences throughout every war movie on television could be profoundly disturbing when I was growing up. I thought he was a pacifist too, like me. Maybe I was naive, or maybe I was just plain stupid. But this time he spelled it out clearly. If I marched in that May 1970 Vietnam moratorium, I was no longer a part of the family. That's the story. That's the beginning of the story.
So that ultimatum really sets up the whole story and drives us through the memoir, because it's a very political story. And even this 18-year-old girl getting this ultimatum, if you go in that march, and still made that decision to participate in the march and to hell with the consequences. So, and this story you've lived with for, years and years, where it's been gestating a long time. What made you write about it now or recently? I know it's taken a few years.
There's a political reason and a personal one. What was sort of an ongoing conundrum to me was that I was working on university campuses, and they were so dead and so non-political, so apolitical on the campus that I teach at Griffith, the Gold Coast. It's illegal to hand out a political brochure, and you'd be escorted off campus if you did. So I just thought, why is it so dead? Why is it so sterile? And that's not what my experience as a young student was. And I saw my own children going through university and not being challenged, or not even knowing half the people on campus, and it's quite a different environment now. And I really wanted to show a new generation of people that life on campus was very deeply engaging and could be very much a journey of discovery. So that was the first thing. And just to show you that, there's a couple of photos from, just to show people the level of engagement that was on campus at that time. There was just a high level of attendance. That's 4,000 people voting on a political issue. 4,000 people when on campus students only numbered 8,000, and there are about 4,012 part-time students and 4,000 external students. So that's 4,000 students and staff taking a political vote at UQ at that time. And it was young students today have got absolutely no comprehension that there would be that level of engagement and that level of debate. And people were debating whether they were left-wing, right-wing, socialist, Marxist, Christian, right-wing, extreme right-wing, DLP or whatever, it was a very wide-ranging debate, and anyone who dared could get up and speak. And that's a whole different thing to what our campuses show now.
So what's happened, Annie? Why have our university campuses become more like shopping centres than places of radical, actually, democracy in action? I mean, by the time I got to uni in the 80s, there were still demonstrations and so on, but nowhere near the numbers of the pictures that you've just shown, which are amazing. So, yeah, what do you...
There are lots of different reasons, of course, like the incredible drop in government funding for students. Most of my students are working part-time or full-time. Everyone's... they also dress a lot better, I must say, than we did. We're actually... we weren't a consumer culture at that stage. We made do with whatever was at hand. And sometimes that was pretty daggy. It's very much more a consumer culture. It's very much a business-driven culture and a help me get a job culture. Whereas we had more time, we had more leisure. Having said that, you can always make time for something that you think is important if you decide to. But there's no easy answers, but I think something needs to be said if you have got school children leading the climate change debates and the university campuses are silent. And that really annoys me.
Yeah, it annoys me too. How do we, I suppose, change it so that our young people, our young adults, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully your book will go out and do something, Annie.
Well, yeah, I would like to be able to just generate some debate about the issue and just challenge people, as I have done in my classes, some of them where you're allowed to, or where you can nip it in. Yes, it's a long journey, but I do think that things are changing, and I do think that these debates are happening again. And so I think it's a timely point for a story like this to go out.
Yeah, great. So around this time too, we had all of that counter culture because I suppose of the Vietnam War bringing images into everybody's lounge room on television, which was still fairly new in Australia. So we had all of that very strong impetus as well. Maybe now also people are a bit desensitized to the horrors of war and you know.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. But so one of the main, apart from the moratorium, we also had Joh Bjelke-Petersen coming into power and the state of emergency with the Springbok tour. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe give us the reading from your experiences of the Springbok demonstrations and the police? Let's just say that's when Joh's first got his taste of power with the
Well, Joh's first taste of dictatorial power was just immediately declaring a state of emergency in Queensland preciously, before the Springboks even landed in Perth. So this was sort of about a month before we've had a state of emergency declared for a football game. And that didn't augur well for the future of the next, the protesters who are wanting to make a stand against apartheid. And we thought that this was absolutely an essential role. And leading up to the Springbok demos, there were debates every day in that forum at University of Queensland. And I must say, for other people, because I was challenged about it at a thing on campus the other day when I said, oh, it was at UQ, and the guy who was leading the discussion says, oh, it was UQ. And I said, it was the only university in Queensland at that time. I'm not being precious about it. It's just that it was the only one. And students don't understand that either. But there were debates every day at uni about that, and they could go on all day or all long into the afternoon. There was, Joh brought in country policemen to bolster up the Brisbane police. So there are about 600 country cops brought in as well. And as I say here, we were at the demonstration outside the Tower Mill motel in on Wickham Terrace. And the Springboks were not happy and coming out and challenging the crowd, and the crowd were yelling back their Springboks, please go home statements. Anyway, here's a thing where the police actually ended up charging I actually charged the demonstrators into the park and beat up anyone who they could get their hands on. Country cops know all about herding, and we were being shoveled into Violence Central. They sort of moved across the road and shoved us down into the park and herded us from down all different parts of the streets, sort of north and south. They herded us into Violence Central, tripping over each other's as we were squashed, then pushed over the brick wall into the park. Trying to stay together, we ran across the grass ground through the dark, tall black trees. These cops were big, badged with numbers removed, batons out under the cover of dark. It was fierce. The air pierced with sounds of people falling, of scuffles and screams. Running for life through this chaos, then stopping for friends, I looked across moving shadows and huddled shapes. I saw raised arms and heard the muffled cries. It seemed the police were lying in wait behind those trees. It was all planned. Anyone who fell over would be easy prey. Don't go that way, these guys, I yelled. This way, down the steep slopes. Suddenly grateful for big family living where I'd always had an escape plan, I knew that moving crossways like a crab was an effective move. Threading through the trees and dodging other panicking escapees was a tricky business, though. The police kept bursting through the darkness, jumping out from trees below us, just waiting to pounce. As we approached the steep cliff face, there weren't many choices. Better to jump than be pushed, I thought. So I jumped, more a stumbling fall than a controlled leap. I had no control at all, really. But our group landed on that lighted path about 8 feet below, relatively unscathed. Just before I jumped, I saw a cluster of shadows crash over the wall to the north of us, dark shapes over them moving back into the park. Then a girl's screams froze that night. Help! Somebody help, she yelled. And we ran to the trio.
Yeah, I love that bit. So as you can see, Annie's really brought back to life what it was like to be a part of those demonstrations and part of the things. Annie, you want to show us some more of those photos, because also it's important about having the women's voices in these things, because women were really in the front line of a lot of these marches and demonstrations, literally. And Annie's got some wonderful photos. There's the Springbok.
I wanted to show one of the strong things I did want to talk about was the whoops.
Go back.
Go back. Was the presence of women in the front lines of those marches. Women. I did a lot of research for this book, and I've read lots of articles and different interpretations of what happened over that period. And nothing very much is written by women, or hardly anything. And the woman's presence and the woman's voice is not apparent at all. And I wanted to show that there were strong women in the front lines. They mightn't have been the lead speakers at that particular time, and it wasn't until the women's lib movement started on campus a little bit later that women actually sort of barged in and started taking a little bit of speaking ground away from the male-dominated terminals that were already established. But I did want to show that there were women, and strong women, sort of there in the front lines and taking their place. And we were not passive. We were not manipulated. We were passionate. We were really very well informed and making very strong decisions about what we were doing.
Yeah. So the Springbok demonstrations too really ignited the Black struggle here in Australia and brought to attention of all of the, predominantly white middle-class Australians who were at UQ, what was happening to our own Indigenous people here. So can you tell us a little bit about what was going on in that movement then? Because that was all very front and centre at UQ as well around that time.
Yes, well, one of the very positive outcomes of the Springbok tours was the absolute unit, coming together of the student radical movement with the Indigenous rights and Aboriginal rights groups. And these groups have been fighting on their own for forever. And it's not that it was a new struggle, it's just that, oh, suddenly we became aware of it and we were challenged to be part of it. We were challenged to find out about it. I've got included in the book is a poster, National Day of Mourning and Protest for Aboriginals come together in Sydney at this place at this time, 26th of January, 1938. 1938. This is not a new thing that's happening now. This has been happening since 1938. And before that, it's a long, long time that they've been struggling and trying to get their voices heard. But when we came together as a result of the apartheid demonstrations, there was a big conference. Dennis Walker and Sammy Watson and a few others, and Gary Foley and different ones in Sydney, Porco, had set up the Black Panther movement in a couple of months before that. And there was a wonderful conference, an ATSIC conference at UQ about 6 months after the Springbok tours. And that was a really amazing time as well, because the Black Panthers were not easily hushed, and it was really interesting because the student radical leaders were not used to people challenging them, saying that they were the racists and they were the ones who were in the wrong, and they'd always had the lofty ground or the high ground, and all of a sudden they were being challenged right in their face, and it was a really full-on conference. It was very, very heated, but it really made everyone think very carefully about Australia's treatment of Indigenous, our own Indigenous people, but also how we are subconsciously racist and how we think we're free-minded, but we are actually acting in a way or presenting in ways that are actually quite racist in their origin. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, a very interesting bit was the opposition of the Black women to the feminist speakers like Merle Thornton. Was up there and being shouted down, actually.
Yes, which was, and Merle wasn't used to that either. She'd always had quite a strong following, but we did not understand then the complex and incredibly harsh reality of the family situations where women for generations in our Indigenous communities have been fighting to keep families together. They weren't fighting about their patriarchal society. They were fighting to keep their children, to keep their families together, to keep their families free. So when people sort of said, oh, well, you know, it's just a big capitalist system, they say, no, the Aborigines live outside the capitalist system. You know, it's never been capitalism that's the problem. It's you guys, you know. And the same with the women. They were saying, no, don't tell us it's a patriarchal society. We have to stick together because otherwise our families are no longer. We have to support each other. We can't be fractured. We can't be divided like that. we need to be united in order to keep our families together. And that was again, and it really incredibly important moment for women learning and women coming together to learn other stories and to learn about other systems of oppression.
So we've talked a lot about the political, and when I first encountered your book too, it was very focused on the political. So everybody, the storm's just started here, like properly.
That's
So
right.
I may have to run and close some windows in a second, but it's a bit distracting. We also thought about this fabulous personal story, because it is actually a very personal story. Because is the personal political, Annie?
Is the personal political? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every part of the personal is political, and it took me a long time to understand that. But I was, I was confronted on many different levels by my journey, and it was a journey of discovery, as I said. I mean, I was brought up in a very large Catholic family that was a very protected environment, went to a private Catholic girls' school. And I was sort of thrown into the middle of this. Oh, well, by choice. I wasn't thrown. I ran there, really. But through my journey, I just was constantly confronted with personal and political situations meshing together. Like my father, like you think that, oh, well, my father kicks me out of home. Oh, okay. Yes, but then he goes and takes his lawyer and visits the head of the special branch and the drug squad and the Terry Lewis, who was our neighbour, and sort of, so my personal story became very political because all of a sudden my father is giving the special branch the names of all my friends. Now that was a little bit rude. I mean, you can get rid of me, but my friends, leave them alone, please. You know, that's just a step too far, I would have thought. And that's the personal becoming political. And Joe had this amazing system set up with the special branch where they just monitored and over-monitored absolutely everything that we were doing. The phones were tapped. If anyone had phones, they were tapped. And so we were also young and stupid, so we played lots of tricks back on them as well. And that was good fun, yes. But
yes, there's also a deeper personal story too of that, very actually hurtful exile from the family. But then also we've got the tragic love story of this, beautiful young man. Do you want to talk a little bit about Neil and how you've been able to bear witness to his life?
Well, there are two things there I want to say. Oh, first off, I'll talk about Neil. Yeah, I'll show you the wonderful, my beautiful friend. Oh my goodness, this is not working very easily. Now, I'll just not show any photos. I'll stop sharing those and come back.
Oh, what a pity.
What a pity. It doesn't matter. I'll point him out in the story. That's much easier.
Remind you, Anne,
Yeah.
there's a
photo of Neil.
Yes.
He was my beautiful boyfriend at the time I was kicked out of home. And about 10 months after I was kicked out of home, he was killed in a car accident, in a motorbike accident. He was a drunk driver, went through a red light and knocked him and my other friend Pete right across the intersection. So, and he passed away very, very sadly. And that was triggering another sort of massive journey for me into dealing with grief and being on my own and having to deal with very deep levels of grief when I didn't really have a set place to live or whatever. But one of the wonderful things that I might pay tribute to is Neil had the most amazing sets of friends, and my journey to safety was a journey in discovering the wonderful friends and friendships that he had, where different groups of, like his school friends, his old school friends, his uni workmates, and his hippie friends all came together and lived in one huge, enormous, very grotty little big house in Highgate Hill. And his friends became my best friends, slowly became my best friends. And that was a difficult journey, but it was one that's been a lifetime living.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly at the very beginning, when you were thrown out of home, you were basically living at the university and sleeping in lecture rooms, and you know, you had to really adapt because you had basically no income or very, very extremely limited income, and you had to think on your feet and somehow survive. And one of my favorite little bits from the book is a story about what young people have to do to survive sometimes on limited incomes. Do you want to do that bit?
Yes, I will do that part, because it's interesting, and you don't know what you're capable of doing until you're actually caught in some situations. So in this situation, I discovered I was a good thief. It was not something I'd ever done before. I applied my own ethics, since I only stole from big stores that could afford a few mislaid goods. I only took essentials, mainly food, but also smokes, alcohol, books, and occasionally clothes. That is, essentials, right? I hadn't been able to gather much from home, or hardly anything, and my clothes were looking sad. It proved easier to snatch clothes in the men's stores. And I don't know why that was, but it was. The women's stores were much more, departments were more highly policed than the men's ones. Anyway, so consequently, my clothes were often male. My jeans were too big, and I found this became useful for my new gift of shoplifting. One Saturday morning, I headed to the local Woolworths. I browsed the shop, becoming hungrier with the looking. Having picked out the few basics I could afford to pay for, I tucked easily hidden items such as tampons under my too big African shirt. But the meat section kept calling me. So inviting, a huge tray of rump steak, drawing me back. It would feed the whole cupboard house. I was living in a cupboard without doors in this particular house. It was a very large cupboard, just didn't have any doors. Anyway, the cry intensified. Finally, I slipped the meat tray under my new shirt and my new white jeans. Then I kept browsing, trying to be invisible. Taking a deep breath, I headed for the front checkout, where there were long queues that morning. It was strange how nice everyone was being, making way politely, allowing me to go ahead of them. Even the checkout lady was friendly, and she was so very efficient. I headed out the door, walking down the street, already salivating at the thought of a hot meat meal, a rare treat. Then I looked down to make sure my goods were secure. The meat tray held vertically under my belt had leaked all its rich red juice down one leg of my very white new jeans. That was an interesting moment. Flashes of scalding embarrassment, mortified. Finally, I thought, what the hell, girl, it worked. It's all right. It will be a great meal. And I burst out laughing. I am such a clever hunter-gatherer. I congratulated myself, then ran all the way home to my home of that month. It was about 7 months since I'd left the family home, and I was doing all right.
I love that bit because it's a very, I suppose it's a very woman story too. And it had to be white as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of the political struggle in there. There's a lot of the journey through grief, but there's also very joyful times because you were young and having fun with all of your friends, and there was also all this fabulous counterculture stuff going on at the time as well. Great poetry festivals, and you'd hitchhike all the way down to Adelaide and all different places, and then the book sort of culminates with the Nimbin Aquarius Festival. So can you tell us a little bit about that, how that happened and how you ended up there, and how that sort of gave us the ending also to the memoir?
Well, the one of the wonderful things of the ongoing progression of it was that people, because of the violence of the police in the protests, people kept constantly debating what other ways have we got to move forward? What are other ways that our society should be organised? How can we address some of these issues? One of the things that came out of the ATSI conference, where there was so much heated debate, was the beginning of the Aboriginal Legal Aid Service with Dennis Walker and Paul Richards, and then Wayne Goss. And people were looking at all sorts of different ways of doing things. Alternative education, we were looking at different food setups. We set up a whole foods cooperative, which, working with organic farmers, sort of aligning with organic farmers and learning about food, learning about different ways of doing things, different ways of educating people. And that came to, ended up with an Aquarius Festival where the wonderful formula for Aquarius was so simple, was art equals culture, equals society, equals politics, equals the way you live. And that was the formula for the whole festival. And people from all the different, who had fled Queensland for different reasons or whatever, people across Australia who were experimenting with all sorts of different ways of doing things came together at Aquarius, and it was great fun. I mean, the community pissoir was not exactly the greatest lavatory setup in the world, but everyone enjoyed and made the most of what we had. Out of that came people from, on a national level, started talking. Every yoga teacher in Australia, I think, must have gone to that festival, because all these alternative exercise things, there was alternative education workshops, drama workshops, theatre, the Whole Foods provided the food for the whole festival, which was an enormous undertaking for young people to just take on and do, all with organic food, and do it all properly. But there was even acupuncturists and chiropractors and anti-psychiatrists, whatever they were. But out of that came a great big sort of a cathartic sort of feeling for me, in that I realised, just in meditating, sitting in the creek, that I had one big dam in my life which was holding me back, and that was the huge block between myself and my family, because I couldn't see them. So I decided then that I would try to repair the situation with my father. It took several years to do that, but that's when I made the decision to do that. and it came out of that particular, again, another huge challenge and another journey through those days of that 10-day festival.
Yeah, lovely. It's a pity we can't see more of the photos, because there is a lovely one, maybe I can show too. So there are just some ones of Nimbin, and the one on the bottom is actually Annie. So they're taken from a movie, a documentary about the Aquarius Festival as well.
There's the
Yeah,
dancing in the magic circle. But yes, the other thing is some wonderful people have got absolutely amazing archives of that time. But I would like to just read one last bit, and then we can then we can go to questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, everyone was debating whether they'd stay on at Nimbin. People, the big challenge was whether to go and live communally in the country, or whether go back into the city and make life different in the city with new social work programs and new housing, safe houses for women, and also all the different things that we were talking about. But everyone was going, oh, are you really going to do it? Are you really going to drop out and go rural? You're going to go country. And anyway, I came to a point where I decided that I couldn't do it. Finally, I knew that I couldn't move into this Nimbin communal place. There were too many ukuleles, too many concertinas and dulcimers coming together on stage as real music. I'm sure it meant a great deal to the performing musos, but it wasn't for me. With a different mix of music in my bloodstream, it grated, it didn't feel right. There are a couple of other deal breakers. I wasn't really a love everybody, hug all type of person. Sure, I could be effusive, but not all the time. I couldn't morph into an earth mother, embracing the eternal light in every corner, welcoming the dawn with finger bells and gongs. And that was happening every morning. I didn't especially like tie-dye, and there was so much of it in this district. While I'd carried a deep respect for those with this driving courage, I disqualified myself in several categories. What I did discover during the Aquarius Festival was an unexpected angst. After 10 days of walking across the green hills, dancing in the magic circle and chanting in the bamboo grove, for some reason I wanted to make peace with my father. It was a disconnect that left me lonely. So that's where it is. And the final section is about that disconnect and how slowly that was healed.
Yes. So I think it's about time for questions now. So do, pump Annie, because she was there on the ground at the time. And
a lot of other people here are too, I think.
Yes. Well, tell us your side of the story too. We'd love to just have your ideas and comments as well. So I think Sue Abby had your hand up before, didn't you, Sue?
I've got a few questions that have been sent through.
Yeah.
So I have one from Bianca. Bianca has, well, she wanted to comment first that she's found it such a fascinating conversation, but she wondered if you could explore and explain a little further for us the title of the book, and if it has more than one meaning or one meaning, or if you could talk a little more to that.
Well, doors are sort of like the metaphor for my journey, really. I was thrown out of the front door of my home, and I loved that door. I've got a photo of it in the book. It was, and I was living in a cupboard that didn't have doors, and I felt unsafe. There were lots of houses before that where I never had my own bedroom, but then when I finally got to Highgate Hill after Neil passed, I actually had a bedroom with doors that I could shut. and I could actually feel safe, and people respected my right to have doors that I could shut, and no, you know, it was my safe place. Then there's also doors in your mind, and doors in my journey. The ATSI conference with all those sort of, that was a door in seeing into a whole new space of Aboriginal life that I had not understood and really did want to get to know and understand on a and engage with. So that's the metaphor for the doors. It just is a metaphor for my life, really. I'm still finding them. They don't go away. They just keep challenging you. Here's one, do you want to take it? You know, you also have to know when to shut them.
Yeah, and I think it's your poetic sensibilities too come through in the book with some of the language, and because you love poetry.
Absolutely, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I've always written poetry, yes.
Yes, but I'm very glad that I got the cover I wanted with the beautiful picture.
Yes,
And not a picture.
I wanted that photo just as the little back bio photo for me, just the little square at the back of the book. And Edwina saw it and said, "No, that's the front cover." And I thought, "Oh my God, I don't know whether I can live with that. I don't know whether my children can live with that." You know. Anyway, that's yes. So my face becomes the beginning of the doors. Yes. And I also love that Stone song from the period, which was, or before the period, where I see a red door and I want to paint it black. The doors, you know, what you do with your doors.
Indeed. And Jen has asked,
Yes.
and I understand that Lila Watson made a very passionate speech at the UQ forum one day. And she wonders, were you there for that? And can you tell us about what she said?
I knew Lila, not as well as I knew Sam. I knew Sam and Maureen Watson and Len, but I didn't know Lila very well at all. And I know she became a speaker, and a passionate speaker and a wonderful speaker, but I probably was not there at that particular day, because I would have remembered it. It would have been seared into my brain to have a passionate Indigenous woman up there speaking. I did see Maureen start talking and stepping out, which was wonderful, but I saw the first time Sam ever got up and spoke at a forum, at a meeting. That was actually at that big great court where 4,000 people voted to strike. That was the first time Sam Watson ever spoke publicly. Yes, but unfortunately I didn't see Lila do that speech.
And Jeanette has asked, when Whitlam made universities free from 1974, what difference did that make to the radicals and to demonstrations?
Well, when Whitlam came in, it was just such a relief. It was a physical relief. It was like everyone just, like this collective sigh that sort of, I'm sure the whales even heard it out in the ocean. It was a strong collective sigh, because your friends, your brothers, your different ones who've been on the special branch radio, they weren't immediately watchable. If you hadn't registered for the draft, or if you had registered and hadn't turned up, you were a criminal, and hunt you down sort of thing. And you couldn't, one story where I got hauled into Roma Street Station was the police turned up at the door and they were asking about particular people and particular things, and I felt like I couldn't give any information because those people, or particularly one of them, was a draft dodger, and you just did not. And so I said, no, I don't know them. No, I've never heard of them. No, they've never lived here. They were living in the house. I did know them. They just weren't there at that moment, which was good. But as a consequence of that, the police put me in the back of the car and took me in for an afternoon grilling, you know. So it was a relief. Having said that, it was short-lived, and it didn't change anything in Queensland very much. And it didn't change anything for my beautiful Aboriginal friends. But people did actively go and set up, you know, the legal aid systems and Caxton Legal Aid and the women's shelters and the all those different social some mental health services started being set up, and acupuncturists and chiropractors and yoga teachers started to abound in number. And but the free university system, it was absolutely marvellous while it lasted. I wish it would come back in now. I don't know what, they're just killing our universities now. And it breaks my heart to see what they're doing at my campus and to see that that's happening on every campus here in Australia. And it's also happening, as my daughter tells me, in England. Oh. So it's very disturbing. I never have understood why the police and the government is so nervous and so wanting to control all debate, why they don't just let people go in the streets and have their say, as we're supposed to be able to do if we're in a democracy. Why is there this paranoia about it? Why do they demonise anyone who wants to do that? That just has never made any sense to me. One of the most wonderful things that's happened in the last 12 months was the Black Lives Matter demo in Brisbane, where 30,000 people marched peacefully through the streets of Brisbane. The police decided to stand back, and because the police stood back, completely peaceful march. The Aboriginal flag flew from the bridge over the river. It was just empowering, and it was across every social demographic, every age group, every style of person, you know, and male, female, black, white, all together marching for Black Lives Matters. And I thought that was the most encouraging thing I've seen for 20 years, which was wonderful. But there needs to be more of it. We need to be able to do the same thing for climate change. We need to be able to do the same thing for the refugees without the police sort of saying, you know, you can't do this, and getting violent and arresting people. Yes.
Margaret has a comment, really. She said, it's interesting to hear another perspective of the period. I was in Brisbane at the time and had a very different experience as a working class migrant. I never did feel I fitted in. Fortunately, I met quite a few people who did not fit in. And what do you think? I mean, UQ offered a place to belong. What do you think the secret was for you, and why was it that you were able to?
Well, the thing is, Queensland was such a conservative, Australia was such a conservative thing. We'd had, 20 something years of Menzies. then we got Joe in Queensland. So it was such a fiercely conservative society, and a lot of people didn't fit into that. Anything that was new or different, like at the school when I was growing up, my primary school, there were migrant kids in that school, and they were treated abominably. You know, they had a shocking time. You know, because they were different, they were victimized. And I can understand somebody not fitting in. And a lot of, like, I didn't fit in because I hated seeing people being bullied, and I every now and then did something to address that. So I was, I never felt like I fitted into the little stereotypes of what a young woman should be. I never sort of fitted that. I don't think I still fit any sort of stereotype. But I'm glad that Margaret found a group where she could fit in. I sort of felt for the first time I fitted in when I got to university, and out of that all-girls Catholic school, and out of my family was the biggest release I'd ever had. It was good.
That actually leads into a question from Catherine, where she's asked if you could talk a little more about your reconnection with your family.
Well, Catherine, that didn't happen easily, and it was a long journey. I finally wrote to my father. It took about a year to do it, and then it took months for him to respond. And then, no, it might have taken a couple of years for me to do it. But anyway, time periods are strange. We had a very, very tense meeting where he gave me a list of rules that I had to abide by. And by that stage, Whitlam had changed, it was in power. And so I said, and that mainly the key rule was in his house, I was never ever to disagree with him again. This is, say, 5 years later. So that's what I agreed to, because I thought, oh, I'm sick of this, you know, I'll just, suck it up. And but then it took years for him to relax in my presence. And it wasn't until I had 3 children, and the youngest was about 3, and I wanted to give them a Christmas present. So my brother was a muso, my younger brother, and I asked him to record some songs that I'd written, which he did. And there were songs about the different moods of the family, different family stories all put into song. And there were different types of songs, different styles of music. And there was one song the final song was called Gorgeous George. And it was just a send up of my dad and, hey, you've got her, but then she's got you. Oh, George, what are you going to do? You know, it's that sort of roundabout song. And in sharing that song and the music of that song, and through music, we actually reconnected, and he started to relax in my presence. But that was a long journey. That was probably a 10-year journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne. And we have come up to the end of our hour. Do you have any final comments, and Edwina also, before we come to the end and open up to everyone to join us in thanking you for tonight?
Well, it was a pleasure working with Edwina as an editor, because I got to put back the story about the meat trays, and I got to put back in the story the sex scenes that were taken out in another incarnation of the story. I just wondered, I thought Sue Abbey had a question. I was wondering whether we would quickly cover her question.
Sorry, send me a question.
No, she didn't send it through. No, that's all right. That's all right. But hello, Sue. Yes. I saw other people, some other people were there. Maggie Lyons is joining me from London. Lee Pointing was another of my friends from that time, from that house, joining me from Denmark, and Dennis and Judy and different ones from Melbourne. So thank you very, very much for doing that. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to say it's a really great book. It's a really good read. And yes, you should all buy it. And also, Bielke Blues is a great companion volume.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
That's a good one indeed. That is a good one.
All the stories of the wrong side. Yeah. Of all the people that don't fit.
All the people who don't fit, but they have a face that they do if they can find it.
Yes. All the non-fitters fit together.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a lovely big stack, as I say, of Book of Doors at Avid Reader. We also have Bielke Blues. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you very, very much. Oh, there's Jeannie too, Jeannie Williams.
And I'd like to invite everyone to unmute, and if you would like to join me in thanking Anne and Edwina for tonight, it'd be very lovely to have your thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Anne.
you. Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Anne.
you for writing down this really important time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It's marvelous that it's a woman's voice, and somebody who is really writing about everyone but themselves, pretty much. You know, that's always a pleasure to read in a memoir when it's this and the times are so well depicted, and the memoir steps aside.
Thank you, Sue. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, look forward to reading it, Annie.
Thank you, Catherine. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, slip back. Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
yes, you're there now.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Anne. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for
Maggie.
writing.
Thank you, Lee. Bye. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, sorry.
Bye.
I've done it now. I was in the middle of